Beginning his career at the NME, iconic writer, music journalist, and broadcaster Steve Lamacq joined the BBC in 1993 in the midst of Matthew Bannister's revolution of Radio 1, partnering Jo Whiley for the groundbreaking evening session. Remaining on the show for over a decade, Lamacq had a front row seat of the cultural revolution of Britpop, becoming one of the most influential music broadcasters in Britain and helped to nurture and inspire a whole generation of musicians. Following the evening session, Steve spearheaded the hugely successful Lamacq Live, which showcased everyone from Coldplay to Frank Turner. I caught up with the original broadcasting maverick to talk heroes, music, and his recollections on a truly unprecedented career in music. Ladies and gentlemen, the heavyweight Steve Lamacq. Okay, Steve, welcome to Beyond the Title for this special episode celebrating your amazing career. Having been able to take some time out and look back on your BBC career, what do you think are the biggest changes in music, and what do you feel about your own contribution to the music industry over the past 30 years?
I mean, when it comes to changes, I mean, the changes have been astronomical. I mean, when you think when myself and Jo Whiley started at Radio 1 on the evening session, we didn't have email. I mean, it was that's the consistent use of the internet to help make radio shows. And obviously the internet's influence on the music industry and the music that how we consume music. So much has changed. I mean, I remember Jo and I doing a program about this incredible new thing called the internet, which was going to change our lives. But when we started, we had a phone and a fax machine, and requests would come in by fax, reams of fax paper every evening. And I sometimes look back and I think, given that our audience and the audience we were sort of pitching to would be, people in their teens, people doing homework, possibly people at university. I think now, who had a fax machine in their bedroom, or were they creeping downstairs to use their folks' faxes so that they could let us know whether the new Supergrass single was any good or not? So, yeah, lots of things have changed. I mean, and musically, I think partly inspired by the changes in formats. Everything has evolved, and music's a lot less, apart from very mainstream pop music and certain elements of, I suppose, what you'd call R&B maybe, and hip hop to a certain extent. But there's very little centre to the music industry. And I think when we started, you had three music papers each week. You had the Peel programme, the evening session, and you had Top of the Pops. And that was about it. That was the only places you could get the sort of music that we liked. And so everyone gathered around this kind of hub, this centre, really. And now there is no centre. There's no Top of the Pops. There's instead of three music papers, there are thousands of websites reviewing, all sorts of music, and it's hard to bring people together. And one of the things which I've always enjoyed really is that ability to find an artist goes on to be popular by bringing loads of people together. So it's slightly more fractured now, the music scene. I think that's possible. That's partly, I think, one of the biggest differences. Everyone sort of moved into different sort of little genres, which have their own particular area. So that in brief is an overview, I think, of how things have changed.
Right. Yeah.
Do you think the BBC were right in getting rid of Top of the Pops?
Well, it was interesting. I mean, I suppose at the time where Top of the Pops was put to the sword, I think its popularity obviously had waned from the glory days of Top of the Pops, but and it was becoming even then increasingly harder to get the acts to perform, to take part as well. And obviously the videos, which used to be exclusive to Top of the Pops, by this point they were, freely available or being shown on various satellite digital TV channels. So I guess it felt maybe that it run its course. The money, I think, part of the budget for Top of the Pops was then put into big events like the Electric Proms, which created obviously unique content for the BBC. The BBC was putting on things which you couldn't see anywhere else. So I think that was an interesting thing to do with it. Whether a Top of the Pops could have survived for another 5 or 10 years and who would still be watching it, I don't know. As I say, as the audiences maybe moved away, what I think we really miss from Top of the Pops is the fact that it reinforced, in some cases, generation gaps, which I think are sometimes healthy in pop music, because we all used to sit down with. I remember starting to watch Top of the Pops in the 70s with my mum and dad sat on the settee behind us, ridiculing, the glam rock music, which I liked, and that was kind of good in a way. But it was a real communal experience and something you talked about the next day. But as with a lot of traditional terrestrial TV, that's sort of happening less and less. So I don't know whether Top of the Pops would have survived. I mean, I still miss it. I have to admit. Um, but yeah, just part of my youthful memories that have vanished.
I've been lucky enough to welcome many people on here who have started their career as a written journalist. In your opinion, how important are publications like The Enemy to recording the fashions and fads of a specific moment in time? And did you ever get a sense that the music landscape was changing?
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about working, I've always worked on weekly papers. I studied a 1 year course in journalism at Harlow Tech after leaving school, and then I joined a local newspaper. And in the days when news just moved and was gone, rather than continuing to exist online forever and ever. And it really, you felt the pace of life and change, I think, because something which was in the papers one week has gone, a month later. So joining the New Musical Express, yeah, you really got a sense of how music was evolving, what the biggest stories were at the time. Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons it's really important. I mean, obviously, it's sped up now to the point where stories will change during the course of a day online. But I think what the music papers had was, although they were very fast paced and kept in tune with what was going on, they had a better overview. So you could see the arc of musical change, I think, more clearly through the journalists who were trying to, in their pieces, give pop music some context. I think we see a lot of reviews now and some quite good interviews and a few features, but there's less places for journalists to be able to sit down and just make sense of what's going on for readers, and in some cases bring a more perceptive, I guess, view of how they see music going, what's important about it, and that being able to have the space of 3,000 words to write a really big piece about music and where it's going. I think that's the important thing that magazines can do, as opposed to maybe some websites.
In 1993, Matthew Bannister was unveiled as a new station controller of Radio 1, which sparked a minor revolution. And as one of the new recruits drafted in to regain the station's youth demographic, how much pressure were you under to deliver the required image, and how did it feel being part of something which shook up the whole broadcasting landscape?
Yeah, this is a slightly mischievous question, isn't it? I don't.
I don't know what you mean.
Oh, do you know what? I was thinking about this the other day, particularly the fact that, yeah, I mean, we now looking back, you can tell Radio One was in a bit of a mess, because when myself and Joe joined, we were considered to be kids. We were the young upstarts. I was 28 by the time we joined. I think Joe was 26 or 27, 28. And you walked in and it's like, oh, the young people here. Young, 28 is considered probably too old almost for Radio One or youth stations now. But that tells you everything you needed to know about the fact that Radio One had just got itself into a rut, and it was incredibly important to change it. And really, it was. I still feel for Matthew, and what he went through during the changes, the immediate aftermath of the changes that he was making, because no one at the time appreciated what his end goal was, and his end goal was to make Radio One a more in touch, youthful, relevant radio station to a part of the audience. And Radio One has kind of lost its way. When we joined, I think Jeff Young's Big Beat, which later obviously that evolves into Pete Tong's Essential Selection on a Friday. That was good. There was the Peel program. Mark Goodyear was doing the evening session. But apart from that, its relevance to alternative culture, particularly, but youth culture, it, quite often was very, very tenuous, I think, by that point. And so it was incredibly important to put it back in touch with the audience it was supposed to be appealing to and reaching. Otherwise, I mean, imagine if Radio One had just stumbled on for another few years in the form that it was, and if it had, would that, and I think it would have done, but you could ask the question, would that have had an impact on the music that came? Would there have been a platform for Britpop or for, the Ibiza anthems that later followed in the 90s, for big beats, even for UK hip hop, all of these things? Would they have broken through in the old school Radio One? I don't think so. So I think the change in Radio One was clearly one of the most important parts of the musical narrative of the 90s. I really do. But do we feel any pressure? Yeah and no. I mean, we signed a 1 year contract, and I think we thought at the end of that year we'd probably be booted out the door. But youthful enthusiasm and nerves managed to see us through the first year, and then we've stayed ever since.
Actually, I think uh, when oh, let's say the really home. So, what yeah, yeah, right.
So anytime we speak to Britpop artists, they actually talk about the importance of the evening session. So without the evening session, what do you think the sort of musical landscape would have looked like in, establishing Britpop, or would that not have happened, do you think?
I think what it did was it opened it up to a broader audience. I think if Britpop had happened, it might have happened anyway, but it would have happened through the pages of The Enemy and The Melody Maker. But would it have had such a dramatic mainstream impact? I don't know, because the great thing about the evening session was obviously we had then a direct line into the playlist at Radio One, which has changed markedly by the point of, you get to 94, 95. And so I think Britpop, as I say, possibly would have happened, but I don't think it would have probably been as big. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, as well as obviously radio, Britpop attracted attention from all kinds of other lifestyle and news publications as well. So this was the era where suddenly Jarvis Cocker and his Hillman Imp are in the pages of the Sun, which wouldn't have happened before. So so we're touching with alternative music, we're touching an audience which would have never have reached before. But I think the session, yeah, partly because we were pretty good at chronicling what was going on. The other thing, which I think, without without sounding modest, I think the other thing which we did is we understood the importance of some of the big records. I mean, we when the Bends came out, we dedicated an entire week to the Bends, which I think was the right thing to do. When Elastica's album came out, I think we spent two programs saying this is an important record, and I think that was kind of crucial. You needed, again, it comes back to contextualizing and making sense of the music that's there and explaining to people why you think it's exciting. So I think having myself and Joe, who were, still, although older, very much part of the audience, understood the audience, was still essentially teenagers, in heart and mind, sharing that attitude to a broad, audience on the radio. I think yes, that was pretty important. We created a community around both the show and the music that was coming through it. I think, which again, that was important because outside of radio, it started discussions between people. All of a sudden, people had favourite bands again, and you could argue about whose band was better than who else's band. And I think this all helped in the dialogue around Britpop, which was one of the things that, just re-energized, I think, the audience.
It's like you know the next question and actually the next couple.
Right.
I will just go back to that one actually. Throughout history, musicians and artists have taken inspiration to do what they do from the socio-economics of their childhood. What do you think it was about growing up in the 80s which made musicians from all walks of life and all areas of the country feel so empowered to make music?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I, I think some of the bands that arrived in the 90s were just a bit too young to have properly experienced punk rock firsthand, but had felt the energy and the attitude of that punk scene, what it meant and why punk had happened. And so they were dealing with the concepts of punk, but in the 90s. I mean, I definitely think, that's the start of the 90s felt quite grim. I mean, not quite as grim as, the parts of the, mid 70s when we were having, power cuts. And by the end of the 70s, everyone's on a 3-day week. And, there was, I don't know, it just felt quite grey. But even the start of the 90s felt like a kind of slightly grim, disorientating time. So I think bands wanted to provide either their own narrative to the social landscape, or they didn't think they had anything to lose. And of course, bands like Pulp benefited from the fact that you still got a reasonable amount of money even if you didn't have a job. So there were various allowance schemes you could be on, which essentially meant you could stay at home and write music or rehearse all day. But I mean, the other thing about Britpop in a way which was interesting was how we viewed ourselves as a country. I think, particularly in musical terms, and we'd been through after post Manchester, the pendulum had sort of swung back towards America, and we were knee deep in grunge. And I don't know, I think there was a slightly rebellious attitude about Britpop, which wanted to find its own identity because it was bored or annoyed by the fact that we were being, once again invaded by music from the States.
And what would you say was the moment when you realised that a musical revolution was taking place in terms of Britpop?
Yeah, I think first night of the Park Life tour. So we'd started on the evening session, but they'd taken the session off because, and this was the battle between the old school and new school Radio One. They took the session off for a night so that they could broadcast live a Bruce Springsteen concert. But it just happened to be the opening night of Blur's Park Life tour. So I took myself off to book myself a cheap hotel, went off to Nottingham, to Rock City in Nottingham for the opening night of Park Life. So Sleeper were on the bill, a band called Salad, you remember, and then Blur headlining. And so I think Girls and Boys is out, but the album in full, I'm not sure whether it's been released, whether I've played some tracks, but I do remember standing in that crowd looking around at the absolute joy and celebration of Blur, which, even 18 months earlier would have been unimaginable, because Blur had been through the ringer. They've been in and out of fashion. They'd made Modern Life is Rubbish, which is a good album, and it's more appreciated as being a great record now than it was at the time. And so there's to come back so triumphantly with these new songs, and this, they dressed the stage with some of the artwork from around the Park Life era, and it was just the feeling in the room. It's a sold out Tuesday night in Nottingham, and all these people are, I've been so excited by this new Blur and this new Blur album. I thought, this is, and it's not a small place. Most of it turns out most of the rest of that tour was equally celebratory. There was just an air of, we found ourselves, and again, going back to that identity thing, it just really felt like we all had something to celebrate. And just in, as in with a lot of cases, when it comes to people we love in this country, it really felt like the underdogs, having been kicked out into the bins. Blur, the underdogs were back and had made a brilliant thing, and it sounded very British. And we're all part of this, and yeah, it just felt like something. That was the night I felt like it. Something's definitely happening.
And if you had to pinpoint a specific moment that defined Britpop, what would that be?
Well, weirdly, it all comes back to Nottingham Rock City. The week that Common People was released, and remember that. So the charts. When did the charts come out? Well, they were on a Sunday. I think the charts came out on a Sunday at that point. Common People had been released on the Monday. I DJ'd at Nottingham Rock City on the Saturday night, so the day before the charts announced. And I think Pulp, we knew the midweek was somewhere in the top five. But playing Common People on the Saturday night, and obviously goes down an absolute storm, which usually sometimes, you get an indie record and it takes about 2 months before everyone knows the words and are prepared to get off there, get out of the seats and dance to it. But in this case, whole dance floor was going mad. And then the next day, Common People by Pulp. Pulp, again, the underdogs, the underachievers, the band have been around for 100 years, being ignored or pilloried. All of a sudden, Pulp, ladies and gentlemen, are number two in the charts with Common People. And you listen to the lyrics and you watch Jarvis doing the song on Top of the Pops. And again, that's essence of Britpop right there, I think.
Without offending Mark Goodyear, the evening session before you and Jo was arguably merely part of Radio 1's graveyard slots. How do you think that yours and Jo's journalistic pedigree gave the show more credibility within the music industry?
I guess because we sounded slightly amateurish at the time, we felt more like part of the audience rather than being, an actual professional DJ who knew what they were doing. So I think that was part of the attraction. But when it comes to the journalism, yeah, I think having grown up with, all different sorts of guitar music, but having grown up being a fan of music and then writing about it and trying to understand it and trying to make sense of what touches people, lyrically and emotionally, or what it is about the music which builds a connection with people. And also being embedded in the industry by this point, and quite a lot of people, quite a lot of A&R people, who were out there trying to sign bands. So I guess, yeah, we've done an apprenticeship in alternative music, which we put to good use on the evening session, I think.
And how do you think those early sessions and interviews from that period have now become vital timestamps which capture the cultural mood of mid-90s Britain?
Yeah, I mean, something like the first Oasis session. I mean, the other thing about the evening session, really, and our appointment is, I mean, it couldn't have been better timed. We got our first contract in October 1993 as Elastica and Sleeper released their debut singles. And then We got a copy of the Oasis one-sided Columbia promo in December 93, and we booked Oasis for their first ever session the week before Christmas 93, and it was broadcast the first week of January 94. Oh, excuse me. How terribly rude. How unprofessional. You see, I still can't get it right even now. But yeah, I think in terms of the as you say, the time stamping and the timing of the whole thing, within 3 months of us arriving and being on air full time, um, Oasis have arrived. There's going to be a new Blur record. There are lots of bands beginning to coalesce around an idea which obviously had grown possibly from that first Suede album and what Pulp were doing. But it was so much sort of going on. But you're right, in terms of the sessions, you listen to that first Oasis session, and it's brilliantly, because it's not bad, but it's brilliantly, this is definitely what a new band sounds like when they first go into a BBC studio. And the interviews as well, they're so, some of them are so some of them are so polite. That's the weird thing. We're listening back to them now. That's slightly, some of them are a little bit, and it's not just the bands. I think me and Joe are occasionally a bit stilted. Joe took to interviewing on the radio much quicker than I did, because I'd been used to hanging out with bands for about 4 hours or 2 days on tour to get an interview. So to then have to work out questioning a band over the course of 5 minutes was something which took me a little bit of time to understand, to be able to self-edit myself. But Joe's interviews are better. I mean, the other thing when you listen back to the tapes, talking about a timestamp, is how different my own voice is. I mean, I sound like a genuine crossbreed of John Peel and Mark Goodyear, but possibly more Mark Goodyear. It's the evening session on 1FM. I mean, it's indie smashy and nicey for about 6 months.
Yeah. Why? And John Hogoya for his leg.
Oh, the last time that Josh was speaking to Joe, they were talking about the Glastonbury when John Squires broke his leg.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, the famous cycling accident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how the line came on
And how different the landscape might have been if he hadn't.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many twists of fate, aren't there? When you look back during pop music history, whether it's, Queen were booked in to do the Today program, and then pulled out, so the Sex Pistols appeared on telly, swore live on air at tea time, and obviously were nationally notorious from that point on. Or as you say, John Squire coming off his bike gives Pulp an amazing platform, doesn't it? To reach a whole new audience. So it's really true. Yeah.
Speaking to both Matthew Priest and Matt Everett about the importance of the evening session, they both commented on the comparisons between you and the legendary John Peel. Well, what's Peel's legacy, and in your opinion, how important is it to have a passionate music journalist as part of the regular schedule at Radio 1?
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, the strange thing, when I think about what I learned from John, I'd learned pretty much everything from John before I met John, just by listening to John's programs. Um, just, I mean, so I'd have been 13 or 14 when I started listening to him, and again, that was an amazing era of the Peel program, because there was post-punk. There were all these bands like the Ruts and Joy Division coming along, Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark. I remember hearing that for the first time. And you learn so much subconsciously, I think, about how you build a radio program out of music, which in a lot of cases, lots of people don't know. It's new to them. So how do you do it? And so I sort of worked out where, put a popular tune here and then, slightly less popular one here, something here, and how you mix up the music. And then weirdly, I had a conversation with John one day and said, how do you do your programs? And he said, I play one record I know the audience will like, one record I think they might like, and then one record which I don't care whether they like it or not, because that one's for me. And then I just do that for the whole hour. So subconsciously, I was doing the same thing, having just listened to the programs. But yeah, again, I suppose it comes down to whether people actually think you are a genuine presenter and whether you have any real authority to be able to talk about this music. And you can only have that authority if you've put some work into it, I think. I mean, a lot of what I've done in my career, and one of the reasons why, I managed to hang around, I think it's just down to graft. Excuse me, because I'm not the best DJ in the world. That's very obvious. I'm not the best interviewer. I'm all right, better at it now. But I'm quite good at A&R. I'm quite good at finding a band. So I'm sort of half good at loads of things, but I work very hard at it to make sure I haven't missed anything. And I do also appreciate that when it comes to building an audience, a lot of it is about trust. So I never get excited by things, really over the top excited by things that I haven't seen live, that I don't genuinely believe in. Because if one day I sold you a dud, then you'd question, well, I mean, I can sell you a record which you don't like, but if I come up with something that just feels uncomfortably out of step with us, and you do that 2 or 3 times, then that trust is broken. And I think what happened with the evening session was people began to trust us when we said this band is good, you should go and see them. Yeah. But that takes work and understanding of the relationship between the presenter and the listener. And I think that's something which probably, again, is something we picked up from John.
Okay. Oh, and, uh, has having said,
Still 10 years.
and
What?
and
Changes.
Right.
Ken Bruce said to Josh that changes in radio are like having sex with a hedgehog. It should be done really carefully.
Very good, Ken. Very good. That's a good tale.
After spearheading the hugely successful Lamacq Live, which became the springboard to the careers of countless artists, in your opinion, how did the show help to change the corporation's attitude towards making and breaking future artists?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that they sort of understood. I think during Britpop, there was an understanding that you are stronger if you've got a slightly better relationship with the music industry. And the music industry is always interested in breaking new things because that's the things that will make them money further down the line. But yes, I suppose what we were doing with Lamacq Live was we ended up giving a lot of bands chances earlier on in their career, I think. bands like Block Party, I guess, did a very early session for us, but I mean, I don't think they'd even properly toured by that point. Um, but it was, but as I say, having built on the trust with the audience, when if we made the right decisions and picked the right bands, I think Radio One were as pleased as punch when the next thing they know is they're quite popular. But it's a reputational thing as well, isn't it? You look back at some of the bands which, I mean, we did an evening session tour just before. I mean, Lamacq Live was on, but it was before I left the evening session. And the opening band on that bill were Muse, and it was Muse's first ever UK tour. So that, and then Muse become Muse, and in 10 years, 10 years down the line, or 5 years down the line, Radio One are incredibly excited because they've got an archive which includes some of the first ever Muse tour dates.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's of value to the BBC, is what you've managed to put into their archive. And certainly that's the same with the very first Coldplay session and the interview which we did on Lamacq Live, which was a result of going to see them on a Tuesday night at the Dublin Castle in front of 33 people. I think it's 33. I counted it, I remember, and I wrote it down somewhere. But 33 people, of which I think about 29 were their mates from UCL, where they were still studying at the time. And brilliantly, when I managed to get the manager's phone number, phoned him up and said, "We'd like to offer you a session on Lamacq Live. You'll be the first unsigned band on Lamacq Live to get a session." And he phoned back a day later and said, "Yeah, we can't do it." I said, "You're not going to do it? You can't? What? Why? What?" And he said, "Yeah, Will's got his finals that day, so he can't do it the day you want us to do it." So anyway, we shoved it back in the diary until they'd finished their exams, and did the first Coldplay session. And that's what's important to the BBC, because when it comes to renewing the charter and government say, what is it about the BBC? What's unique? What do you stand for? Why are you worth the public's money? Then I think encouraging and promoting new, young British music, which will go on to be globally well known, I think that's pretty good value for money. And part of the job that the BBC should do is giving access to musicians so they have a platform.
Do you think that's why Glastonbury is so important to them?
Yeah, I think yes. I mean, there's not a huge amount in the live music budget. Not as much as probably there was 20 years ago. But Glastonbury is quite a focal point, isn't it? I mean, I think if you are the BBC and you've got to cover one musical event, then Glastonbury still has to be the one, because it's the one that the conversation's all about. It's you're providing a service to the people who can't go to Glastonbury because it's so hard getting a bloody ticket to Glastonbury. So that's a public service, isn't it? In the same way that the FA Cup is coverage for all the fans who couldn't get a bloody ticket for that either.
Earlier this year, you reunited with Jo Whiley for the BBC Sounds podcast, The Rise and Fall of Oasis. How do you think their timely reunion has affected the Oasis story as a whole?
Well, it was a really good. I mean, for a start, we didn't know, right? Because when I've been asked, did you know that it was, in the offing? Had you heard a rumor that the reunion might happen? And we obviously we didn't. And it was interesting going back through the archive and realizing just how volatile the brothers' relationship has always been. Because you imagine, you think about, there was a couple of bust ups in the 90s, and then you think, oh yeah, and then eventually they split up, they have an argument in Paris, and that's it, it's all over. But actually we worked out that throughout the 8 episodes there was a fight in every episode. So reevaluating just how fractious their relationship was was interesting to me. I mean, most people, you remember them by the records, and the level of popularity and infamy that which they had. But actually, we tried to do it as a human story as well, of what was key to their success and what mistakes did they make. And it becomes apparent by about episode 4 of The Rise and Fall that their constant mistake is just thinking we can sort this out by going on tour. We won't settle any of these problems. We'll just get back out on the road because people want to see us, so we'll go back out on tour. And everyone knows, everyone outside musicians knows that if there is some sort of fracture or weak link in a band, the place where that's going to become most apparent is somewhere halfway across America in a tour bus where you can't escape the rest of the group and you are tired, possibly hungover. You have to do an interview when as soon as you arrive, and then you've got to go on stage with people with whom your relationship is at this point very strained. That's what I sort of learned about the Oasis thing. But in terms of the reunion, what does it mean to them? We'll see it play out, won't we? Because I'm amazed they're doing so many dates. But they're who who knows what their relationship is like now. It might be better than we imagine. They might just have worked out a way which they're confident they can get through these dates on different buses, in different hotel rooms, on different sides, on different sides of the stage. I don't know how they're going to do it, but they obviously believe they can. And there's and a lot of people who want to see them do it.
What fun. Oh, do you think it will actually happen? The whole tour, it will take place. It won't be cancelled before, or for whatever reason.
I think it will. I think it will. I don't. I think. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, this is the one of the reasons why Oasis was always so interesting is that you never knew what was going to happen next, and it played out in the 90s at the height of the popularity of soap operas, and it was a soap opera in itself. You didn't really know which character was going to be out the door next, and I think that's how it will play out again, and I think there'll be a lot of scrutiny as well, which I don't think in some cases is very helpful to them. If they stay out of the press, if they have worked out a way that they can rub along together, and they make it through without Liam, taking slightly winding up his brother, then I think it will happen. Yeah. How far we get, whether they actually make it to Mexico, I wouldn't bet my house on.
How has their reunion altered the narrative of Britpop?
It's certainly, I suppose, it's brought it back into the public eye, hasn't it? Has it altered? I don't think for anyone who lived through Britpop, it's going to change much because everyone's experienced it. Whether it will change how the history of Britpop is written further down the line, I don't know. I think, in a way, Oasis, even Blur to a certain extent, their reunion shows, they're kind of not even part of Britpop anymore. It's part of their own story. It would be like saying, the Stones were part of that, a scene in the 60s. But from the 80s onwards, they're just the Rolling Stones. They exist in their own world, I think. And I think that's Oasis now.
Yeah. What's the legacy of Britpop?
Well, I've got at least 30 T-shirts upstairs that have all got V-necks. That's the legacy of Britpop. But V-neck T-shirts. What is its legacy? I mean, it's part of. I suppose one of the things. I mean, it's weird. I mean, even yourselves, I think you probably understand that it's a bit odd that these days a music scene which happened 30 years ago, is still influential as a musical force for bands who are forming now. If you'd have gone back 30 years from the Sex Pistols, you'd have been in 1946, wouldn't you? And there's no relation. But now we live with the shadow of previous musical scenes, whether it's shoegaze or grunge or Britpop. They're all sort of still there, I think. The one thing I'd like to think about Britpop at its best is that there were some great songs and some great songwriting. Damon Albarn and Graham Coxon, great songwriters. The original Suede team of Anderson and Butler, great songwriters. There were great songs, and if any, and an Oasis. Listening again to "Don't Look Back in Anger" is a brilliant song, and I remember hearing it for the first time when we were given a promo cassette of the record. These are all, yeah, they're all great songs. Does it? I mean, I guess, I mean, contentiously, I could say, has it held us back from more musical experimentation of bands trying out other things? Are we too indebted to music from the past? I don't. I hope not, and I hope there will be, maybe inspired by this Oasis reunion, a group that comes along that takes something from the '90s and does something new with it, which in a way I think is almost what Arctic Monkeys kind of did. They took bits of the past, and if Britpop begat, it's weird. You can see if you have everything. So I always say pop music, there's for every action there's a reaction. So from Britpop we dived into slightly more obscure, progressive indie indie rock, I guess, in a way. You had all of a sudden Radiohead making experimental records, the arrival of Mogwai, fiercely independent, which was the antithesis of the mainstream of Blur and Oasis. And it goes around the circle, and then the reaction to that is the arrival of the Strokes and all the bands from New York, and then as a reaction to that we have our own new rave, and it goes on and on like that. And I hope that, so it's, if Britpop is anything, it's just one bit of the dominoes that have fallen to get us to music where we are.
If cultural historians in 300 years came across the Britpop phenomenon, what do you think they would learn about the societal attitudes towards pop culture in the mid 90s?
I think they think it was. I think they think everyone was pretty happy. Do you know what I mean? I think. I mean, not necessarily with the world around. With the world around. I don't know. The weird thing is, because Blur and Oasis tell the story in a different way, don't they? You get the feeling that Damon Albarn, I mean, Park Life, Modern Life, and Park Life are quite outsider records. They're looking at a world around them which feels a little bit uncomfortable, maybe to the. So it's not even Park Life, which is now such a celebratory record. Has at its core a certain element of cynicism. And Oasis is all about everyone being together, making the best of it, I suppose. And maybe that's it. Maybe what they'll think is, maybe what they won't get, but what they should get is that Britpop was an absolutely perfect example of what pop music does best and represents, which is escapism, where you can leave your mundane life and be part of something else, where music will come along and take you somewhere, lift you up, maybe make you sad, maybe make you reflective, but you are somewhere else. And that again was the thing about the evening session, was you could escape to your bedroom post homework and escape into a different world. You could have lived miles from anywhere, but you're part of this gang. And that's what Britpop did. It brought loads of people together and made us, just, I don't know, brought us all together, made a gang out of us. And that's what I think. That's what I would advise. It. Maybe I'll write a little note to a historian, bury it somewhere, and when they dig it up in 300 years' time, just in case you've got summed up Britpop wrong, I'm going to tell you what Britpop should mean to you, the historians, because this is my take on it. and I was there. So there.
Yeah. Looking back at your career, what's your proudest achievement?
What? Oh, Mikey, what's my proudest achievement? Don't know. I mean, I've done a lot of things. I think I wrote some good stuff at the New Musical Express. I wrote the review of Nevermind by Nirvana, which I got the cassette on the Monday, I think, and I had to hand in the review on the Thursday, so I didn't have a long time to live with the album. But mercifully, I gave it 9 out of 10 and called it a rock blueprint for the '90s. So I didn't embarrass myself there. Quite proud of that. The evening session and some of the shows we did. And in between, actually, having left the NME and before joining Radio One, I co-started a little record label, and we signed Elastica, and so I, sort of half A&R'd the Elastica debut album, which proved very successful and still sounds really good now. All them things are good, and being part of the Six Music story, I think, and proving after it was nearly closed down how important that network is to the listeners who just rely on it really as their window into a different sort of music which they like, and again to try and make sense of the music which they might like. So yeah, I mean, there's look. Ask me again tomorrow, and I'll probably say it's the moment that I was playing for the Radio 1 five-a-side team at Phoenix Festival, and we were playing Loaded, a team from Loaded magazine, who played a load of ringers, right? And I saved a shot from Gordon Strachan, who obviously a very famous player who would go on to be a very famous manager. We managed to draw 0-0, and as I walked off, Gordon Strachan walked over to us and said, "Some good saves there, Golly." Wow. I've still got a career. I could still make it. I could be a contender.
That's brilliant. So just to finish off, what's next for Steve Lamacq?
At the moment, I'm doing my own podcast with a guy called Stuart Dredge. It's called The Price of Music. It's about how the finances of the music industry work, which sounds very dry, but actually a lot of practical advice for musicians and lots of stories that you can get under or discuss, whether it's dynamic ticket pricing or whatever. I'm chair of Live, which is the live music trade body, so campaigning for advantageous changes at government, which will help live music, including, a VAT cut wouldn't go amiss and would actually really help put some money back into live music, particularly at grassroots level, and carrying on doing radio. I mean, touch wood, I've got a contract at Six Music, which will take us through another 14 months or so, and then we'll see from there. But always what's next, and this is going to sound really corny, but always what's next is what'll turn up tomorrow, and who are we going to see playing live in the next month or so, because you never know. The best thing that you've heard in 5 years could be the thing that you listen to tomorrow, and I think that's what drives a lot of us on, really. Certainly it does me. You just never know what's around the corner.
Where do we get
Where do we get the podcast? Where can we listen to that?
Oh, at all your podcast suppliers, Apple, Spotify, anywhere, YouTube probably, anywhere they've got podcasts, and we're probably lurking in a corner.
Very good. Wow.
this is the
This episode has been at the very top of Josh's bucket list, so thank you very much for your time today, Steve.
Oh, bless you. Sorry about. Sorry. Well, sorry. Sorry it took so long to sort it out, and sorry my phone went off halfway through. How terribly rude. I apologise. But it's lovely talking to you. And do you know what, Josh? Those are the best set of questions which I've had in an interview, because I don't do many of these things anymore because the questions are always boring. But they weren't. So bless you. Thank you very much for putting so much effort.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Take care.